Welcome to the Book Review Podcast.
Great to be diving in.
Today, we're looking at Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos.
Yeah, it's definitely made some waves.
It really has. And, it's not your typical self-help book, is it? It's more like this blend. Psychology, philosophy, myth, even biblical stories.
Absolutely. It's trying to offer these principles, these sort of guidelines for navigating what can feel like a pretty chaotic modern world.
Exactly. Finding order, finding meaning, especially when things get tough, and taking responsibility. That seems key.
That idea of responsibility is huge in the book.
Yeah.
So where should we start? Maybe with Peterson's own approach.
Good idea. He has this way of talking about really deep, complex stuff in, almost everyday conversation. It's quite unique.
It is. He's clearly very knowledgeable, erudite even, but there's this enthusiasm. He wants to connect the dots for you,
Yeah, like sharing a discovery. And it makes sense, I guess, because 12 Rules came out of his earlier work, Maps of Meaning, which was much denser.
Right. Oh, much denser.
Yeah.
Maps of Meaning was really this deep academic dive into how humans sort of create order from chaos psychologically and culturally. 12 Rules makes that more accessible.
More actionable, maybe.
Exactly. Actionable principles for life, drawn from those bigger ideas about chaos and order being these fundamental forces we all grapple with.
Okay, so let's get into some of those rules or the ideas behind them. What about morality? He definitely challenges some modern ideas there.
He really does, particularly this notion that morality is purely relative. The whole what's true for you isn't true for me idea applied to ethics.
Which is pretty widespread, especially in some academic thinking.
Yeah.
The idea that it's all just power structures.
Right. And Peterson argues that this kind of extreme relativism can actually be paralyzing. If everything's relative, how do you even give advice, especially to young people?
Yeah, there's this reluctance to say this is right or this is wrong. It becomes all about tolerance, sometimes to an extreme.
But then he contrasts that with the opposite problem, rigid ideology.
Ah, yes, the black and white thinking.
Exactly, where the ideologue is absolutely certain they have the final truth and is incredibly judgmental of anyone who steps outside that. So he sees danger on both sides.
The mushiness of relativism versus the sharp edges of ideology.
Well put. And he argues that we actually need some shared moral ground for society to function. It creates predictability, allows cooperation. It simplifies the world in a way.
So when those shared beliefs break down, things get unstable.
That seems to be the argument. That's when you see chaos start to creep in more.
This connects to another big theme, meaning versus happiness.
Oh, definitely. He's quite critical of just chasing happiness as the main goal in life.
He uses Solzhenitsyn, right? The experiences in the gulags.
Yeah, a very powerful example. Solzhenitsyn apparently said that the idea that humans are meant for happiness is, shattered by the first blow of the work camp whip.
Wow. So the argument is the happiness is too flimsy.
Too flimsy, too dependent on circumstances. Peterson suggests that a deeper sense of meaning, often forged through suffering and responsibility, is actually what sustains us. It's about building character, not just feeling good momentarily.
Okay, so we have chaos and order, meaning over happiness. Let's go back to chaos and order. He uses the Taoist symbol, the yin and yang.
Right. The black and white serpents interlocked, each containing a seed of the other. It represents these two fundamental realities, the unknown, the unpredictable chaos, and the known structured order.
And they're not static, are they? They're constantly interacting, changing.
Exactly. Like weather within climate or individual lives within society. There are layers of stability and change happening all the time. And sometimes the most important order, like social hierarchies, isn't immediately obvious.
Hierarchies. Let's talk about the lobsters.
The lobsters, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably his most famous, maybe infamous example.
He uses them to talk about the biology of hierarchy, right? How deep it runs.
He does. He points out that even lobsters have dominance hierarchies, and their brain chemistry actually changes depending on whether they win or lose a fight. A losing lobster adopts a subordinate posture, less willing to fight again.
So it's suggesting these structures aren't just human social constructs.
That's the implication, that hierarchies are ancient, biologically rooted, and common across many species. He also brings in things like Price's Law.
The 80-20 rule thing.
Sort of, yeah. The idea that a small percentage often produces the majority of the output, and the Matthew principle, to those who have, more will be given. Inequality seems to be a natural feature of many systems.
And being low on that hierarchy, that has real effects. physically.
Absolutely. He talks about this ancient counter in the brain that tracks your social standing. If you're consistently at the bottom, it triggers a chronic stress response.
Like being constantly on high alert.
Exactly. And that chronic stress burns through resources, weakens the immune system, makes you more impulsive, more focused on the short term. It's a tough cycle to break.
It sounds like a feedback loop.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he talks about positive feedback loops elsewhere too, but often in a negative sense, vicious cycles.
Like the concert feedback squeal.
Yeah, that's the analogy. A small input gets amplified over and over until it's overwhelming. He applies it to things like addiction.
Where using leads to withdrawal, which leads to more using.
Right. Or even something like agoraphobia, where anxiety leads to avoidance, which reinforces the brain's fear signal, making the anxiety worse over time. Small problem spiraling.
Okay, so if we're wired for hierarchy and susceptible to these negative loops, what's the antidote? That brings us to rule 1, maybe. Stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Yeah, it ties right in. It's not just about posture. It's about adopting a stance of readiness and competence, assertiveness, moral courage even.
He argues against just being passive.
Right.
Especially with bullies or tyranny.
Very strongly. He suggests that suppressing rightful anger doesn't make it disappear. It often turns into resentment, which is corrosive.
And realizing you have the capacity for aggression can be, well, startling.
It can be. But he argues that integrating that capacity, learning to stand up for yourself and your values, is crucial. It protects you, and it actually helps protect society from becoming corrupt or tyrannical because people are willing to push back.
And the posture itself. It affects how you feel and how others see you.
That's the idea. It's a two-way street. Your body language influences your internal state, and it definitely influences how others interact with you. Standing tall can actually make you feel more confident, and people tend to treat you with more respect.
It's amazing how interconnected it all is. But sometimes behavior is just baffling. He gives that example of transplant patients.
Oh yeah, the ones who don't take their anti-rejection meds. It's such a striking example of self-destructive behavior.
Right. They get this incredible second chance, and then they sabotage it. Why?
Well, that's the thing. He uses it to show that human motivation is incredibly complex. It's not always rational. There can be deep, maybe unconscious reasons why people don't take care of themselves, even when their life depends on it.
Which leads to maybe rule 2. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping.
Exactly. But first, underpinning all this is the reality of subjective experience, especially pain.
You can't argue someone out of their pain.
No. He insists that subjective experience, particularly suffering, is fundamentally real. It's an irreducible truth of being. It's not just an illusion or a misinterpretation.
Okay, and how does that tie into something like the Genesis story? He interprets that symbolically, right?
Yes, very much so. Not as literal history, but as a profound myth about the emergence of human self-consciousness. Leaving the Garden of Eden is like waking up to the world.
Waking up to good and evil, vulnerability, death.
All of it. Gaining that knowledge, that self-awareness is what makes us human. It allows for incredible creativity, but it also opens the door to, well, calculated cruelty. We become aware of how fragile things are, including ourselves.
So that awareness brings responsibility, which brings us back to treating yourself like someone you're responsible for helping.
Precisely. The argument is, you have a vital role to play in the world, you matter. Therefore, you have a moral obligation to take care of yourself, your health, your well-being, with the same seriousness you'd apply to caring for a loved one.
It reframes self-care completely. It's not selfish, it's a duty.
A duty to your own potential and maybe to the world.
He also talks about choosing your path carefully, avoiding bad influences, the Chris and Ed example.
Right. Two cousins, similar potential maybe, but one drifts, gets pulled into a negative crowd, and his life goes off track. It shows how seemingly small choices, who you associate with, can have huge downstream consequences.
Which leads into rule 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you.
Exactly. Choose friends who are aiming upward, whose own lives would improve if yours did. It's about mutual betterment. Loyalty doesn't mean supporting self-destruction.
That's a tough one sometimes.
It can be. He also differentiates between being a hero and just, not being a villain. True heroism is active. It's striving towards something good, not just avoiding bad. And related to that, he cautions about trying to rescue people who seem determined to drag themselves, and maybe you, down. There are limits to helpfulness.
No, you can't always pull someone up, especially if they don't want it. And sometimes they might pull you down instead.
That's the danger he highlights.
Okay, rule 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Yes. This addresses envy and the trap of constant social comparison.
Especially easy today with social media.
Incredibly easy. He points out that seeing someone who excels can be challenging, implicitly asking if you're living up to your potential.
And instead of being inspired, we can feel resentful or inadequate.
Right. So the advice is to focus on your own trajectory. Are you improving bit by bit? That's a more productive and, frankly, more winnable game than comparing yourself to the highlight reels of others.
He's also against positive illusions, isn't he? The idea that we need to kind of trick ourselves to be happy.
Yeah, he advocates for facing reality, warts and all. Believing you need self-deception to cope is, in his view, fundamentally pessimistic about human resilience. Truth, even difficult truth, is better in the long run.
So focus on your own path, your own improvement, and maybe practice gratitude for what you do have, rather than focusing on what others have.
Gratitude is key there, yeah. It helps counteract that feeling of victimhood or resentment and define success broadly across all the different games you're playing in life.
Yeah.
Work, family, health, learning.
What about resentment itself? You mentioned it earlier. Is it always bad?
Not necessarily. He sees it as a really important signal. It tells you one of two things. Either you're being immature and need to sort of get over it and take responsibility, or you're genuinely being taken advantage of or facing some kind of tyranny, and you have a moral obligation to speak up and do something about it. Resentment is information.
You have to figure out which it is.
Exactly. Requires honesty. But ignoring it lets the problem fester.
This seems tied to this inherent human dissatisfaction he talks about. We're always seeing the flaws, striving for better.
Seems to be part of our nature, doesn't it? Always looking towards the future, aiming for improvement. It drives progress, but it can also make us miss the good in the present.
So the antidote isn't to stop striving, but maybe to focus on small, manageable improvements. Like Rule 5, maybe. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. No, wait, that's later. Rule 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Rule 6 is closer, yeah. But the idea of small steps is definitely in there. Ask yourself every day, what's one small thing I can fix or make a little better?
Accumulating small wins.
Precisely. Because our perception is so selective anyway, we focus on our goals, and we're mostly blind to everything else unless it gets in our way.
We filter reality constantly.
Massively. So focusing on small, fixable problems within your sphere of influence makes sense.
He brings in the Bible quite a bit, interpreting it psychologically.
He does. He sees it as this foundational document for Western culture, emerging from millennia of human experience and collective imagination. Not necessarily literal truth, but packed with archetypal truths about how we live and find meaning.
And faith. How does he define that?
Not as blind belief, but more like a commitment. An irrational commitment, perhaps, to the idea that being itself is ultimately good, despite all the suffering. It's the stance you take against the tragedy of life, aiming upward towards truth and the highest good you can conceive.
A way to combat nihilism.
Exactly. You have to articulate your values, aim for something noble, otherwise life can feel meaningless.
Okay, shifting a bit. He doesn't shy away from the darker side of things, like primate violence.
Right, the chimps.
Yeah.
He points out their capacity for brutal, organized violence to suggest that this isn't just a human invention tied to society, it has deeper roots.
A sobering thought. And it connects to the importance of socialization for humans.
Hugely important. Rule 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. This sounds harsh, maybe, but the point is about effective socialization.
Why is it so important?
Because poorly socialized children struggle.
Yeah.
They don't learn how to interact, how to gain positive attention. They become isolated, maybe aggressive or withdrawn. And forming relationships with poorly socialized adults is difficult.
So parents have a crucial responsibility to teach limits, rules,
Yeah.
discipline.
Yes. Conscious discipline. He argues it's essential, and that sometimes, yes, punishment, clear consequences is a necessary part of that. Unchecked defiance isn't kindness. It can lead to problems down the road.
He even challenges the idea of no excuse for physical punishment, suggesting that the word no only has power because it's ultimately backed by some kind of force or consequence.
It's a controversial point, for sure, but he's arguing about the fundamental nature of authority and boundary setting. And he acknowledges how hard parenting is, how constant defiance can make even good parents resentful and potentially overly harsh if they don't have effective strategies.
So clear rules actually help kids feel secure.
That's the idea. Structure and predictable consequences foster security, calmness, better development. Discipline, in this view, is an act of care.
Okay, wow. Uh, Connecting back to darkness, he links existential angst, like Tolstoy's, to mass shootings.
He does. It's a really dark connection. The idea is that if life feels utterly meaningless and absurd, one extreme nihilistic response is a violent lashing out against being itself, an act of existential vengeance.
Which brings us back to Rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Exactly. It's a call for humility. Look at the chaos in your own life, your own heart, before you try to radically rearrange society based on some ideology. Clean up your own act first.
It's a prerequisite.
A necessary one, he argues.
Okay, let's talk about sacrifice. Rule 7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Right. This ties back to the Genesis story again. Leaving paradise means entering a world where work and sacrifice are necessary.
And sacrifice, delaying gratification, that's uniquely human.
Largely, yes. The understanding that giving up something valuable now can lead to something better later. It's future-oriented thinking.
And the ultimate archetype of that is
Christ, in his interpretation, the ultimate voluntary sacrifice for the highest good, for the advancement of being. It's a powerful archetype for how to live meaningfully, facing suffering head-on.
it involves listening to your conscience, like Socrates' daemon.
Yes, that inner voice telling you what feels right or wrong, even when it's inconvenient. Ignoring that voice, choosing expedience over meaning, corrupts you over time.
And self-awareness. It gives us the capacity for good, but also for evil. Knowing our own weaknesses tells us how to hurt others.
That's the disturbing flip side of self-consciousness. It enables empathy, but also calculated cruelty. It's the internal conflict Cain and Abel, Horus and Set, playing out within us and between us. Confronting evil, internal or external, has risks.
Christ rejecting Satan's temptations in the desert fits here too, choosing meaning over power or ease.
Exactly. Rejecting the expedient path, turning stones to bread, ruling kingdoms, for a deeper, more truthful way of being that addresses the fundamental problems of life.
But rigid belief can also be a problem, right? Like dogma leading to devaluing this life.
Yes, that's a danger, he acknowledges. Unthinking dogma can lead to passivity, rejecting personal responsibility for fixing things here and now.
And the death of God idea, losing that traditional framework.
That creates a vacuum, Nietzsche warned. Leads to nihilism, despair, and makes people vulnerable to potentially dangerous utopian ideologies that promise paradise on earth, often through terrible means. It's hard to invent your own values from scratch.
So we need values, but we also need to be willing to update them. Sacrifice old beliefs for new growth.
That seems to be the evolutionary path, doesn't it? Progress requires letting go of what no longer serves truth or life.
Jung's idea of a hierarchy of values comes in here. Everyone has a God, an ultimate value.
Right. Whatever you act out as most important is your God, functionally speaking. And the choice is often between aligning yourself with something akin to the archetype of good, Christ, or the archetype of evil, Satan, creation, and truth, versus destruction and deceit.
So meaning is found on that path between chaos and order, guided by truth.
That's Rule 7 in essence. Pursue what is meaningful, let that guide you. And that leads directly into Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
Why is lying so corrosive?
Because it warps reality, your reality, and potentially the reality of others. It requires arrogance, thinking you can get away with twisting reality, and it compounds. One lie needs another to support it. It leads you down a false path, potentially towards disaster.
And it prevents you from confronting your own flaws.
Exactly. You can't fix a problem you refuse to acknowledge truthfully. Face your own darkness before judging others too harshly.
So respect tradition, but keep your eyes open for corruption.
A balance, yeah. Learn from the past, but don't be blind to present-day ignorance or malevolence. Use the sword of truth, even if it leads to necessary conflict.
Conflict is sometimes needed for growth.
Often, yes. In relationships, in personal development. Avoiding uncomfortable truths doesn't make them go away. It usually makes things worse.
Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't.
The importance of genuine listening.
Instead of just waiting for your turn to talk or trying to win.
Right. So much conversation is just people playing status games, trying to dominate. But if you truly listen without constantly judging or formulating your rebuttal, you might actually learn something. People can surprise you.
It's about mutual exchange, not just broadcasting.
Yes. And it connects to how we even stay sane. We sort of outsource our sanity to the people around us. Their reactions help us regulate our own behavior.
Which is why parents have that huge responsibility to socialize kids. Teach them how to read social cues.
Absolutely fundamental. Without that feedback loop, people can become quite adrift. unbearable, even.
We also get deeply invested in groups, don't we? Like sports teams.
Oh, yeah. Identification with groups is incredibly powerful. Psychologically, even biochemically, we feel their wins and losses almost as our own.
Okay, so we filter reality, we rely on social feedback, we tell truths or lies.
Yeah.
But reality is still incredibly complex, right? More than we perceive.
Vastly more complex. Our perception creates a simplified model, an illusion almost, that lets us function. But when something unexpected happens, an accident, the betrayal that illusion shatters.
And then you feel the chaos underneath. Anxiety, uncertainty.
Exactly. Suddenly the past looks different, the future is uncertain, even the present feels unstable. Things you thought you knew are thrown into question.
Is that why we avoid disagreements sometimes? Fear of that chaos breaking through?
Could be part of it. The fear that the relationship might break down, the fear of confronting unpleasant truths, maybe even the fear of our own negative reactions, our own inner monster.
So avoiding small problems lets them grow into
That great reptilian monster of the unknown, as he poetically puts it. Ignored reality doesn't vanish. It festers and becomes something much scarier.
Which is why careful language is important. Naming things brings them into order. Rule 10, be precise in your speech.
Yes. Precision helps define the problem. It carves the manageable known out of the overwhelming unknown. When you can articulate exactly what's wrong, you can start to address it. Vague anxieties are much harder to tackle.
It gives you a target.
A target, exactly.
He uses examples like taking down playground equipment, how attempts to control everything can backfire.
Yeah, or putting skate stoppers on ledges. Sometimes attempts to eliminate one kind of chaos or risk just create different problems or suppress natural, maybe even necessary behaviors. Life is messy. You can't make it perfectly safe or predictable.
And helping others. It's complex too. You need to understand the real problem.
Right, like his example of why women might leave high-powered law firms. It might not be the simple reason they give. You have to dig deeper, understand the underlying dynamics and motivations. Surface explanations are often incomplete.
He talks about marriage dynamics too, the socioeconomic factors.
He does. The link between marriage stability and income, women often preferring partners of equal or higher status, especially we're thinking about children, and the documented negative effects of father absence. These are complex, often uncomfortable realities he engages with.
And progress.
Yeah.
It's not always straightforwardly good. Technology, social changes.
He questions that narrative sometimes. Things like the birth control pill, massive changes, yes, but did they solely lead to liberation? Or did they introduce new complexities and challenges? It's worth asking nuanced questions.
He also looks at the appeal of ideologies, even dangerous ones, like people joining movements in the past while ignoring atrocities.
Yeah, the Spanish Civil War example, overlooking Stalin's purges. Ideologies can offer meaning and purpose, but they can also demand blindness to inconvenient truths and justify terrible actions in the name of a supposedly greater good.
And he's critical of some postmodernist ideas, like Derrida.
Quite critical. Particularly the questioning of stable categories, the focus on power dynamics above all else, the potential dismissal of objective truth. He sees this as potentially leading to a situation where might makes right, where arguments are just assertions of power.
Okay, let's switch on archetypes again. Jung, Neumann,
Right.
the terrible mother.
Right. These aren't literal figures, but psychological patterns. The terrible mother archetype represents the smothering, overprotective force, often parental, but not always, that prevents growth and independence. Too much order, in a way, preventing necessary engagement with chaos.
Interesting. And even something like rough banter among men. It can have a social function.
He suggests it can, within certain contexts. Camaraderie, testing boundaries, negotiating status, evaluating character. Not always pleasant, but potentially functional within that group dynamic.
Like the Charles Atlas ad. The weakling transforms himself.
Exactly. That's a classic archetype. Transformation through facing challenge, overcoming weakness, gaining respect. A powerful narrative.
And women wanting competent partners. That creates challenges for successful women.
That's an observation he makes, yes. That if women tend to partner across or up in terms of status or competence, highly successful women might have a smaller pool of potential partners who meet that criterion. Again, complex social dynamics.
We also identify with groups easily, right? Even random ones.
Minimal group identification, yeah.
Yeah.
Tajfeld's studies showed we favor our in-group even if the group is totally arbitrary. Tribalism runs deep.
And finding the root cause. Michaela's illness example.
Right, his daughter's health issues. The need to look beyond symptoms, sometimes conventional diagnoses, to find the underlying problem. Complex problems often require looking deeper than the surface.
Okay, almost there. Suffering. Dostoevsky's challenge about a good God and suffering children.
The ultimate challenge, perhaps. How can an all-good, all-powerful God allow horrendous suffering, especially of the innocent? Peterson doesn't offer easy answers, but he grapples with the depth of this problem.
And the paradox of love and limitation. We love people because of their flaws, not to spite them.
He explores that idea, yeah, that vulnerability and imperfection are part of what makes us human and lovable. Artificial perfection might be monstrous, not divine. Like Superman needing limitations to be relatable, to be a hero.
Struggle is necessary for meaning.
It seems so. Without challenge, without limitations, what is there to overcome? What meaning can be found?
But extreme suffering can lead to nihilism, the temptation to say it's all meaningless.
Understandably so. When pain is profound and seems pointless, the belief that existence itself is flawed, or that non-existence would be better, can become very tempting. And sometimes conventional solutions like medicine just aren't enough.
Rule 11. Do not bother children when they're skateboarding.
Yeah.
Metaphorical.
Mostly, yes. It's about letting people, especially young men perhaps, engage in challenging, risky activities. That's how they develop competence, learn boundaries, confront chaos voluntarily. Over-interfering, trying to make everything perfectly safe, hinders that development. Let them grapple with the world.
And Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street.
Yes. Seems lighter, but it's profound, too. It's about finding moments of grace and connection amidst the suffering and complexity of life. A reminder to stay open to the good, however small, even when things are difficult.
Pay attention to the small wonders.
Exactly. And it ties into asking yourself those meaningful questions. What could I do today to make things a little better? What small step can I take? Don't wait for utopia. Work with what's in front of you.
Because avoiding truth, avoiding responsibility, it weakens you.
It corrupts the soul, he might say, leads to more suffering down the line. Hell, in a way, is knowing you ended up somewhere terrible because of your own choices, your own lies and failures.
So it all comes down to seeing properly, being aware, engaged.
That active, goal-oriented perception, seeing the world clearly enough to navigate it effectively, to confront the necessary chaos, and to aim truthfully towards a better future.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to chew on from 12 Rules for Life. It definitely pushes you to think.
It certainly does. It's challenging, sometimes provocative, but full of ideas about confronting life head-on.
We hope this deep dive gave everyone listening some aha moments, maybe, or encouraged you to check out the book if you haven't. What rule or idea stood out most to you? We'd love to hear.
Definitely a book that sparks conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Book Review Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a comment. See you next time.